Now the first thing to pay attention to when you first start to paint is the stance you're going to take. I try and always paint standing up. That's how I paint when I'm outside, so it seems to make sense when you're in the studio to replicate the position you would be if you're outside, in the hope that it will give you the same sort of lively, fresh image. So it's important to have your board about 30 degrees so that you're facing it in a natural way, and then when you paint, you're painting holding the brush at arm's length, and the natural weight of the arm on the brush will help deliver the paint to the paper, so you can make a nice free stroke and you're painting with your arm rather than forever with your wrist. And that includes when you start to draw. You can draw with your arm extended, and you can see the whole of the image all at the same time. This is a piece of Arches rough, £140, so it will cockle a bit, but it'll soon go back, and the rough texture of the paper will help take the washes off the brush. The paper you use, I think, depends partly on how you want the picture to look, but it also depends on the natural way that you deliver the paint to the paper. Arches, which is externally sized, so I understand, will gives you slightly more time to work because the washes lay on the surface of the paper. Bockingford, which is internally sized and is a cellulose paper, the washes are absorbed partly into the paper, so you have to work slightly quicker, particularly on a warm day like and a windy day like today. So not only is it important to think of the paper in terms of the way the washes will look on the paper, but also the speed that you work, your natural pace, and the way you deliver the paint to the paper. You've got to use more force with a rougher paper like Arches than you have with Bockingford, where essentially you just use the brush to deliver the paint to the paper and the marker's almost there straight away. Right, now this is a 4B pencil, and I'm just going to do a little bit of sketching out. I don't overdraw it, otherwise you end up just colouring in between the lines. I want it to look like a painting, not something out of a child's colouring in book. I just do the minimum number of lines to guide the brush. The most important thing to start with is just placing it, all the main forms on the paper in the right place. I don't want a wonderful picture of a boat there when I really wanted it here. So don't try and solve all your problems at once. The horizon is roughly about here, so that'll stop me sort of creeping up the page. There's a shed here. I'm just doing it from a little sketch. And I'll start sort of drawing pretty well at having the pencil at arm's length. Make a good positive mark so that you don't have to sort of peer at it and wonder whether you've actually got the you're wondering what mark is the right one. Show the drawing who's boss. Big sheds ray in the sort of distance here. Some bits and pieces of boats. You can just about see them in the distance. And then there's the distance there. So the grass comes down here. Got the large door that's used to be blue, now it's black, but I like to keep it sort of blue colour. There's often a car parked here, but I like to put a boat as it's some posts, and they help. Having a post in front of a boat in front of a shed sort of gives depth to the picture. Make sure the horizon comes out the same level as the on the left hand side as it does on the right. There's all these lines focus here. There's some old concrete steps here which naturally lead into the picture. Excuse me. And composition, as far as I'm concerned, is trying to get the viewer to look where you want them to look, but it's also about replicating where the viewer would look if they were there for real. And viewers, when you're walking about the countryside, you don't just simply focus on one spot. Your attention is taken by lots of different things. Might be the light on a greenhouse that just glints in the sun, or a little bit of bright colour, something way in the distance, a moving car with the light catching the windscreen, or a little white boat, bit of red. But these are secondary or tertiary focal points, interest, and so you need to decide on a main area. And of course, if you were walking along this sea wall, you would be looking at where you hope to go, where you plan to go, where the route is, the next foot forward, and that's really where your main focal point is. So you need to replicate the viewpoint of the viewer, of the actual person, a real person sort of walking along there, so that they don't feel uneasy. And there's lots of different masts and things, but a lot of these I could put in with the brush. So that's about as much drawing as I would do. Now this is my very simple setup. I'm right-handed, so I have my palette and my watercolour brushes all on the right, so that I can smoothly go from the paint, which I get from the palette, to the paper, back to the water pot, paint, paper. So there's a natural flow, and I can keep my focus on the picture and almost find the colours in the palette and the water without looking. Right, now you don't have to necessarily start with the sky. In fact, that doesn't always make a lot of sense in starting with the sky. It's a big area and it's nice to sort of feel your way. And in fact, sometimes it's a good idea to start in a peculiar, somewhere where perhaps it doesn't matter if you get slightly wrong, because the first tones are always the hardest to judge against all of this white paper. There's a bit of ultramarine and burnt umber. And let's start with this sort of shed here. A bit more ultramarine. When it's dark colours, it's nice to sort of keep changing them. As long as they're dark, keep your brush nice and at arm's length. Don't suddenly tighten up, simply because it's a little bit on the fiddly side. So a little bit of a alizarin now, alizarin crimson. Come down there, down here. Cover. Make sure these are dark, so we don't want any. We don't want any dark, any sort of sparkle in them. And these doors, as I say, they used to be blue. So ultramarine and a bit of cobalt, two blues together, put that in. A little bit of, as the sun is coming from the left, I'll just leave a little bit of light on that edge there. and then cobalt, a little bit of light red, although all these sheds are very dark, including the roofs, because the roofs face the sky, they're actually surprisingly light. Now I used cobalt for that, so let's use a little bit of ultramarine now and light red, just to vary it a bit, and get these distant roofs in here. Try and, to get that nice clean fresh look, try and paint each area once, the way you want it to look at the end. Do the drawing, the edge first, when you paint. It's a little bit darker here, then just a tiny bit more red with it. And in fact what we'll do now is sort of go down, up cobalt, and a little bit of burnt umber now, and we'll go straight into the wall here. Chimney there, a little bit of light there. And once I get here, I'm really starting to paint the shape of the boat. There. I can do the same here, a bit more burnt umber, just for variation rather than for any other reason. A bit more cobalt. So paint each area once, the way you want it to look at the end, to avoid having to keep going backwards and forwards, and then you sort of condemn yourself to over painting everything, and you lose all of the freshness. Just while that's drying, let's a bit of raw sienna, dirty raw sienna really, just to lay in here. This bit of raw umber now, just to lay in this sort of old concrete wall. I'm going to put a little bit of cobalt violet with that now. Keep it light, that's the important thing. Tone is the most important thing, and as it's catching the light, the odd little bit of untouched paper, bit of sparkle, won't hurt. Right, and that's drying off nice and quickly. Let's put in this very light roof here with one go, and put there. And let's have some cerulean now. That's with a little bit of burnt sienna. And if you want to vary your greys, it seems to me the most sensible thing to do is just vary the mixtures that you use to make them. Change the blue and change the orangey red. That's probably a little bit too bluey, a bit of burnt umber with it. Like there's some old boats and things there that we'll come to. Right, now we've done that, we'll just let that dry off for a bit, and then perhaps we'll think about the sky. Right, while these sheds were drying, I just used the opportunity to wipe my palette clean. Now I said I was going to do the sky, but in fact I think I'll just cheer myself up a little bit by finishing off these sheds, or at least do a little bit more work on them. So again, ultramarine and burnt sienna this time. It's very important to get these darks in one go. This will define where the light is. So there's a a shadow underneath this eave here. Just underneath that. Ultramarine and burnt sienna, quite thick paint, just to give a sense of this. There's a window here. Do that with a bit of dry brush, and we can put a little thick sort of gutter line just along here, and just there's a lot, I'm not sure what it is, but a little bit of light coloured thing there. Back to the ultramarines, a bit of burnt umber now, and to get the shadow underneath here, it won't be quite so wide. Shadow there. There's a little bit of burnt umber. Get a nice deep shadow on the side of here, and of course they'll cast a shadow. Little shadow here, there, and underneath that. Bit of cobalt now. Make it slightly bluer, not quite so dark as we go into the distance. The diagonal shadow there. Put these in here. Bit of shadow there and there. There's a Viridian and raw. No, let's have some burnt sienna with that. Little bush there. Just get that so it all merges. And then ultramarine with a bit of light red. Get the bluey distance there. I'm much more concerned about getting edges connected than I am thinking about, oh, I should have done the sky before I've done that. That's I think that leads to sort of colouring in, and you sort of worry too much about the process. In fact, while I've got the blue on the brush, I'll just brush in a little bit of the distance over there, so it's sort of, there's a consistency to that distance. And that one there. We can also just do a little bit of work on this sort of door here. Come down here. There's the side of this building here, and that casts a shadow. I like just to indicate a little bit of the sort of weatherboarding on this building here, this old shed. Don't make it too architectural though. Pick it up, lose it, just in various areas. A little bit of interest on that, and of course there'll be the hinges on the door. So if I use a slightly smaller, but well, quite a small brush, just want to so that it's sort of clearly a door. Again, don't be too architectural about it. It's just enough to explain what it is. A little bit of extra dark down there. Pull that corner in. Just the odd line down here, just to finish that off. And I'll reward myself now with a little bit of red. Not overly done. Just on the anti-fouling of a boat there. And a bit of Windsor blue, which is a nice bluey transparent blue. There's sort of boats, that boat yard between the sheds. Right, now we've we can, while that's drying, we could just do a little bit of extra work on these old steps here. Then there's grass growing up between the cracks. That's really viridian and a little bit of raw sienna. Brush is a bit on the dirty side. Dark in there and perhaps in there as well. We'll come back and do a bit more work on that sort of later on. One little mark on here. Tiny bit of green lichen and stuff just in there. Just suggest it so that the viewer does the rest. We over-explain, they'll get bored. Bit of light red and burnt sienna for this welcome red roof here. And got a grey roof here. Grey-green now, but never mind. But that all sort of fuzz and join on, that doesn't matter. We've got enough hard edges around here, and you can see how that really sort of sticks forward. Right, just clear the palette up with and I'll do a little bit to the boat before we stop again. Cobalt and ultramarine. Get the gun all along here. Get it in one sweep if you can. Then put a little bit of light red with that blue to get a grey here. If you can, paint round that post. It'll look a lot better, light against dark. And then we've got the anti-fouling, the red on the bottom of the boat. It's here and there. Thicker paint now because I'm going into next to that damp shadow, so if I put thicker paint I'll get a fuzzy edge, but I won't. It'll absorb some of the excess moisture. Quite dark under there. And it's a welcome little bit of red. And while that's drying again, I may as well just finish off these other little suggestions of boats. Just try and do them in one. This chap will have a blue bottom on the was anti-fouling. Do it nice and crisply. Tiny bit of shadow here, and then soften that so you get a sense that the boat is round. Ultramarine almost straight out of the tube, just to make that a little bit more bluey there. And then we've got some figures little figures way in the distance. Just suggest them. A bit of shadow there. And the dark of this shade here, we'll set up that. edge there. While we're about it, we could do this little notice board here, selling fish, dark in there. Some bit of shadow as well underneath that. Again, notice I'm not concerned about the fact that I haven't done all of this. That'll come. These sort of abstracty darks will just be enough, hopefully, to suggest to the viewer there's other things going on. Right, we'll stop there while we have a bit of a clear up and let that dry, and now I will finally do the sky. Right, now when you do the sky, particularly when you've got buildings, make sure that you don't obviously have a sky shaped around the buildings. So the sky wants to look as if it goes behind the buildings as is a backdrop. Right, now a little bit of cobalt, pretty well neat cobalt. I'll just put a touch of cerulean. Cerulean is quite a heavy opaque pigment, and it does tend to granulate. Right, we'll start here, start at the top and work down. A nice sort of rough edge to it, and try and finish each area the way you want it to look as usual. Now, a bit of raw sienna and light red with lots and lots of water. Start here and we'll have a little bit more light red. A bit more water. Go there and here. And then more cobalt and light red. Cobalt and light red should give me a bluey grey, which we can brush in to the underneaths of these clouds. And bear in mind where the sun is coming from. It's coming from the left, and therefore any shade on these clouds will be on the right hand side. Now, if there's any blue lower down, it'll be slightly lighter. I'll just put a little bit of cerulean and alizarin. Cerulean and alizarin. Just to give a slightly darker edge on the underneath of these clouds where they sort of turn in. Then back to the light red. A bit more light red. And as we come down, of course, these clouds just touch it so that they connect and make friends with one another, but don't lose the form of them either. Then some more of the bluey grey with the light red. Move it about. I want it to look like a blustery, typical East Anglian busy sky. Now you can get recession obviously in the sky. The clouds get smaller as we go into the distance. So small there against this. Let's make sure we do them by the if you go over a building, I'll just mop that up. It's fairly easy to do on arch paper, and they go way into the distance. And once we've got that done, we can then drop in some of these edges of the underneath of these clouds. Just, as I say, connect them vertically at the same time, so you don't get a series of long horizontal sausages going into the distance. Don't worry about all the little flecks of white paper. Here I'm just painting, forcing out the white cabin top of that yacht there. Bit of dry brush in some of those white holes, but just be careful. I'll just take that overlap there off. Then stop. And if you think you're going to get up to mischief, go on with something else. Let's do this. It stops you watching it dry, the sky, and it will dry unevenly, simply because some areas have got more water than others. And that, you can then start to worry and poke about at it, and then you'll regret it. So I think it's a good idea just to get on with something else, a big area like this, and you can't be looking at the sky worrying about it while you're doing that. That's going to be a nice big sort of simple area. There's a bit of cadmium orange, and don't often use that. It's not a colour I use a lot, just to get this sort of yellowy reeds and things. Nice warm colour. I like to use attractive colour that looks credible. Important for it to look attractive, and important for it to look credible. Notice I haven't used the word accurate. I'm not so concerned about that, because if you worry too much about accuracy, you lose the, you get tight. Right, let's just let that dry off now, and we will then be in the closing stages. Right, we've just got this large area of green in, which is always, green's always a problem. Raw sienna and viridian. Try and avoid ever using viridian straight out the tube. It's a horrible colour, but it's a useful base green. It's transparent and permanent. Lots of raw sienna with that. So we'll start here. So a little bit of aureolin in there now. Just keep changing it because it's quite sort of sunny over here. Bits of green there. A little bit more raw sienna. Raw umber and raw sienna together. Give the brush a good clean between so you can get the change of colour distinct. Back to the, a little bit of raw umber in there. Now I'm using the green to set up that concrete, the remnants of this concrete. I think it was an old railway line. And that falls away. So have your brush strokes in the contour of the ground. And it's a nice rich green just here. Really press the brush into this arch paper. You know, paint with what I call the belly of the brush. You know, now while that's drying, I'll just clean this up with a nice sponge. We'll just make one or two little marks just to force out edges and boats. That's force that out there. There's another boat there, or little dinghy I should say. Bit of Viridian, cerulean. Light red triangles. Little, as Charles Hawthorne used to say, the American artist tutor, little spots of colour, and let the viewer do the rest. Now, one or two areas of dark, just to bring up the shadows. Good shadow in here. That will bring out the prow of the boat. There's some shadows connecting across here. There's grass. And it's quite still a little bit wet, but they'll join on to that. Diagonal shadow there. Just the odd diagonal shadow like that indicates the direction of the sun, which is always useful. Don't make it too obvious. These posts, a little bit of dark just on the right hand side. Of course they'll cast a shadow, but it'll be a shadow in long grass and weeds, so it'll be pick it up, lose it, pick it up, lose it a little bit. Cobalt, burnt umber, a nice sort of dry brush. Post, so it's different from the others essentially. Raw umber, quite stiff, just to give it a little bit of texture and direction. Dark weeds and things growing up, smudge it with your finger. That just sets up the concrete on that light area there. There's a little bit of lemony yellow just there, something there as well. Lobster pots, fishing pots. More figures just in the distance there. And of course there'll be odd shadow, these will be shadows and have shadow coming from there. Something unseen. All helps sort of focus the composition. Another shadow there, just to reinforce the direction of the light. We've got a couple of fairly well drawn boats, so I'm hoping the suggested boats here will be, let's just make that one a little bit greyer. The suggestion will be enough for the viewer to work out what they are. Shadow there. Right, let's just stop there, have another clear up, and then a few final touches, and we'll be home and dry. Right, now let's put little bit of detail in with the masts, cerulean and raw umber. There's a mast here. And red sail, perhaps a little sail come down here. Bit of burnt umber, cobalt. Get some other masts in. There's some over the back, over these. And way down the distance here. Try and vary them a bit in terms of height, and in particular there's a telegraph pole there. In particular, vary the gap between them if you can. It's ever so easy to regularly do them every centimetre, every half inch, and then you look back and you realise you've actually got a series of fence posts. Of course, if you're actually in front of the subject, then you just take the ones that are there, and it's when you're working from probably an incomplete sketch and memory that you realise it's extremely difficult to recreate the sheer random untidiness of man and nature. Tiny little marks just here, again mainly sort of composition to drive the viewer into the distance. An adjustment of tone. Feel that I need to get that I need to get this a little bit darker. You don't have to darken everything, it will just come out a little bit more on that corner there. I'm just going to glaze this roof here. It's too much, just with a bit of burnt umber. That will just warm it up a bit and just vary it a tiny bit. And then put a few little spots of naughty colour. Let's have some bright red, cadmium red, just on there. Put another spot there and there. And a bit of yellow, there's odd bits of rubbish all the way along. And another dark, just emphasise that dark there. But don't go around looking for things to, whatever you put in should sort of strengthen the picture, not weaken it. Don't say everything twice, otherwise people don't really tell anybody something twice. They get fed up and they don't listen. However quick and rough that looks, I think we'll call that a day. It's got something of the atmosphere, and it's got a nice sort of lively spring feel to the picture. So it does communicate a little bit more of the feeling. They're a bit too regular. Let's get rid of one of overdone those. You can, if while it's still wet, just reduce them a little bit. Got carried away there. Right, thanks for watching and listening, and I hope you all enjoy that and you found something I've done or something I've said useful in your own painting.